If you come to YouTube looking to get information, knowledge about what is happening in conflicts around the world, I have bad news for you. You are getting only a fraction of the true picture, and YouTube is responsible. Now, I'm Paul. You guys know this channel. I'm a U.S. Army combat veteran, and this channel is dedicated to providing analysis of world conflicts, and we cover stories and I help break down the tactics, techniques, strategies that each side is using. And my channel, as you can probably imagine, experienced a huge amount of growth in September of 2020, or when there was the tremendous surge of interest in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But as time has gone on, my job as an analyst has become increasingly difficult. I would even say possibly untenable. And it's because YouTube is deliberately creating and enforcing policies in ways that prevent independent analysis of the actual events in these conflict zones. Let me explain to you what I'm talking about. So when the war in Ukraine began, YouTube's policies around combat content were pretty clear. You couldn't show individual human beings being hurt or killed, which is I think, a very reasonable stance to take for your public platform. And on most major news channels, they also adhere to this stance. You could show, for example, a soldier's funeral, but you couldn't show a soldier being KIA or being or the bodies of combatants. You notice I have to even play some euphemism games. I can't say what actually happens to a soldier who is KIA. I have to use those 3 letters. And these sort of YouTube games have become really pervasive. But it's more than just the language. The language thing is fine. We all know what I mean when I say a casualty. Where the problem comes in is that initially in the conflict, right, you could show the things that were happening. When we use words like Russia's invasion, or sometimes even Russian propaganda sources would use words like special military operation or incursion, and they would use language games to try to twist what was happening. But because we could see in real time, in some cases, the actual acts that Russia was doing, we could watch Russian tank columns rolling towards Kiev, that Russia's propaganda games weren't able to have an effect. And that's why the public became mobilized to support Ukrainian efforts and aid them in defending their country. It's because they could see with their own 2 eyes, we all could, what was really going on inside the country. But as time went on, YouTube began to tighten the noose on its creators in terms of what they could show. After a couple months, the rule became explosions. I would get demonetized for simply showing an explosion, something that my videos had had for dozens of times up until that point. And remember, when a video on YouTube is demonetized and ads are no longer run on that video, YouTube's algorithm no longer shows it to anyone. It shows it only to people who actively search it out. For example, it might play as part of a playlist, or if someone has notifications turned on a channel, then they'll get notified the video has gone live. Typically, what I have found is when a video is demonetized, in fact, I can show you one of my recently demonetized videos, and you tell me if you can see the point where the video became demonetized on this graph. Any guesses? When do you think the video became demonetized by the YouTube algorithm, right? You can see here it has 5,558 views. Demonetization hits, and it goes from 555 to its current level of 6,001 views. Now, around this point, right around, I think, day 5 or 6, I unlisted it just to try to figure out what was going on. But the takeaway here is this is what happens to your favorite creators when YouTube decides to demonetize or limit the ads that they are allowed to run. So, but after a time, YouTube tightened their policies again. Now, you couldn't even show shooting of any kind. Now, when it comes to shooting, YouTube's own policies say that shooting at unseen targets, this is from their policy guidelines, right? Shooting at unseen targets without display or depictions of suffering or agony are supposed to be fully monetizable. But slowly I noticed that even when I would depict those videos, say a helmet cam of someone shooting just into the woods, it would get demonetized, which is strange because their policy actually has a carve out supporting it. But it's how things are enforced and interpreted that make all the difference. And at the end of the day, the only person I can petition for resolution on this issue is YouTube themselves. And YouTube almost always agrees that YouTube made the right call. And now, after the Israel-Hamas war has kicked off, YouTube's policies have tightened even more. Now, YouTube's rule is any image depicting destruction will get demonetized. So I'd show videos with no injured people, no bodies of any kind, simply destroyed buildings, destroyed environments. Those can no longer run ads. And that, to me, is the problem. Because YouTube is not just an entertainment platform. We are not just Mr. Beast. Every channel on YouTube is not Mr. Beast. We are not here to have fun. I don't have a fun channel. I don't make jokes about it because war isn't a joke. My job on this channel and many channels like it is to inform the public, is to provide consumers, watchers, the context they need to understand what policies their politicians support, what their tax dollars are doing. Here's the thing. If you're an American citizen, your tax dollars are destroying buildings in Gaza, right? Now, whether you think it's right or wrong, that's not my job as an analyst. But you should understand those are the weapons destroying those buildings. And in order to cover the war, you have no choice but to depict it. And once you prohibit people from depicting those images, then you're prohibiting people from covering the war itself. War is a destructive act inherently. There is no non-destructive war. Non-destructive war is peace or an annexation, maybe. The other problem, the deeper problem, is that when you don't have images to communicate what's happening, you have nothing left but words. And the problem with words is that they are debatable. You can wrestle words into meanings that they didn't have originally. The classic example is, some of you are probably old enough to remember, Abu Ghraib in the Iraq War. Now, I literally can't show you these images. They're 25 years old, but in 2003, these images, they're 20 years old. In 2003, these images were everywhere. And the story is basically this. Early in the U.S. invasion of Iraq, the U.S. public and, frankly, many Iraqis supported the United States. Saddam was a brutal dictator. They did hate him, and they believed that the Americans would at least try to install a more inclusive and functioning government in the country. And that the forces that opposed the U.S. forces in Iraq, they claimed that the Americans were infidels and they were invaders and they were there to torture and kill Muslims. And most Iraqis dismissed that as a conspiracy theory, as nonsense, right? Because unlike the Iraqi military, the U.S. military didn't kill civilians wholesale. They didn't brutalize infrastructure or religious sites pointlessly. The problem arose when images came out from a U.S.-run detention center at a prison called Abu Ghraib. And these images depicted what was clearly torture, psychological and at times physical torture. And the reason these images changed both the Iraqi public's opinion, turned almost all of them against the coalition forces immediately, but it also turned the U.S. public against the war massively. And the reason they did so is not because there wasn't already discussions of torture, right? The Bush administration famously condoned torture. The issue is what happened is when the first reports came out that the U.S. was engaging in torture of prisoners it took in Iraq and Afghanistan, the administration and their media spin machine tried to create debates about what exactly constituted torture. And so the debates became about things like waterboarding or stress positions, right? They took this word and added these specialty definitions, tweaked the meaning until it became a subject of tremendous debate. And instead of debating the morality of doing these things, right, it became nuances about, well, how stress positions are or are not torture, where does interrogation end and torture begin, and splitting hairs is what the administration wanted to do. It wanted to break apart consensus, which up until that point had been American forces don't torture their enemies, and turn it into a messy, nuanced debate. And when you just have a word on a piece of paper, you can do that. But the images in Abu Ghraib changed the game because it didn't matter what you called it. It didn't matter if you called it enhanced interrogation or torture or cruelty or a war crime. The images were undeniable proof that specific acts were being done against Iraqi prisoners. And that is what shifted the American public's perception of what was happening. They finally understood that what was happening beyond the words and the euphemisms. I very publicly don't have a stance. I am not an Israeli and I'm not a Palestinian. I don't have an opinion on the conflict. But if I can't show you images, then the only way you will form opinions is based on the words of the parties. You notice that some people like to describe Israel's policies and tactics, the things Israel's doing, as a genocide. And there's a lot of debate about what constitutes a genocide, and by turning the debate into the exact meaning of words, right? What is acceptable civilian casualties? What is a genocide? What is a war crime? You can take what's supposed to be a debate about right and wrong and turn it into a legal debate about the dictionary definition of words. At the end of the day, as long as you can see with your own two eyes what's happening in these places, right? If you can see a warplane destroy an apartment building, you can at least understand what is actually being talked about, the thing that the words represent. YouTube has stopped us, those of us that analyze the war, from showing you this, from moving past the words into the reality that's happening. And yeah, in Ukraine, we should understand what our aid is doing. In Israel and Gaza, we need to understand what our aid is doing. And it's disturbing, very disturbing, that YouTube's monetization policies have restricted it. I can no longer show you footage released by the IDF that they claim is a Hamas tunnel. I can't show it to you anymore. They're all demonetized. It's preposterous. So we have no choice then but to believe Israel's claims, right? No one can refute them because we can't show you, we can't examine them for ourselves. And this policymaking by YouTube is making everyone not dumber. We're the same. We're just as intelligent, but we have to work with less and less and less information. Instead of becoming a more well-informed public, we're a more poorly informed public. And I don't know what to do about it, honestly. There's not much I can do. I'm going to continue to try to do neutral analysis to the best of my ability for you guys. I'm going to be on here as long as the platform will have me. And I'm going to try to do the deeper analysis on my own site, right, that I host myself, and that will also help. But ultimately, guys, there's only so much that we can do. But just as long as you understand, as the public, understand the strength of the filter on the other side of the screen that stops key information about what's really going on from happening to you. Anyway, thank you guys as always. I appreciate your support, and I will see you guys in the next video. Cheers.